VRChat, the next frontier. These are the experiences from Gunter's universe. His continuing mission? To seek out and connect with VR devs and passionate enthusiasts. To discuss theories, beliefs, and rhetoric of all kind. And to boldly go where no show has ever gone before.
Welcome back to Gunter's Universe, everyone. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah.
Open up those mics.
Yeah.
Scream. Any more? Make a little more noise. Yeah, how are you guys doing tonight?
Doing good.
I hear all this amazing enthusiasm. Yay, you're awesome. We did have a late start, and so some people probably maybe dozed off. Welcome back to Gunter's Universe. We are here again. This is the show where we interview all kinds of luminaries and different personalities and developers and artists from our community. We are here tonight. I have the pleasure of talking with Paul Marcano, and all of you here know him as Artist 3D. He is a creator of both Where Spheres Collide and the recently released 10,001 Dreams. Paul has been creating. Oh shit! Where Spheres Touch,
Nice.
and the recently released 10,001 Dreams. Paul has been creating art since the 70s and has explored all kinds of technology along the way that enables him to express himself in novel and interesting ways. Paul has been visiting virtual worlds since the 90s with his first art gallery taking place in the Duke Nukem engine. There's so much to say about Artist 3D, and I'm so happy I get to interview you tonight on Gunter's Universe. Let's all welcome Artist 3D to the show. What's up, man?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Sweet. Oh,
Yes.
Love it. Thank you.
A little bit of a rough intro, but I lost my whole sheet there, so it was very confusing. Yes, Artist, you're on the show. We've been hanging out in VRChat for a little while now. I think we first met through GM3. Godfrey, man.
Probably, yeah. GM3. He's a new friend of mine in the VR worlds.
Yeah.
Got introduced to him. How was it? I think we were Facebook. Somehow connected with something he posted.
You guys
on
in
Facebook.
one of those groups? He creates some of your art kind of similar to his, some 360 psychedelic, fractal kind of stuff.
He sends me bed tracks, and I had my guitar, and then he takes it and breaks it all up into little pieces, sends it back, and I go, okay, so like, where was I in that mix? Because he's like so, on with his music. He's got a piece called When the Sun Dies, which I'm absolutely in love with as a tune. I don't know if you ever had a chance to hear it, but it's pretty amazing.
I have not. He's pretty prolific like yourself. You guys create, work, tons of work. He's creating something every day, and then in here he's building studios and just, I don't know, man.
And we hang out in Kingsspray painting murals.
Yeah, I saw that. Freaking Dolly. We were talking about Dolly before the show. You were creating a Dolly mural.
Yeah, we did.
So tonight there's not, can't show the pictures tonight, can't show videos because we're limited in VRChat, but you will be able to explore all this work on YouTube and other places, and then you really just dive into your worlds where your art is everywhere.
Yeah. Well, the VR is the medium, isn't it? I mean, if you want to combine sound, music, graphics, art, it's the place to bring it all together, really.
Yes.
And I've been doing that all my life, really. And the medium of computers and making,
Let's bring it back. I like to learn people's history before we get into modern day times. Tell me about your life, maybe growing up pre 18, pre getting into music and going out and life on your own.
New York City, born in New York City. Parent came to Canada, married a Canadian, and all my friends back in Poundridge, which is kind of north of New York, were terrified that I was going to be heading into the Great White North, where there was just igloos and nobody knew what Canada was back in the 50s or the 60s. It was like, where is that? Is that like
that's funny.
Is that one? Is that a state up there somewhere? But and so when we moved up here, I was rather surprised that it really wasn't as harsh as it was made out to be. And so I've been in Canada since I was about 10 years old, pretty much.
kind of interesting how you're saying like people really didn't think about Canada or have awareness. People were kind of in their own local zones, really took inventions like the telephone and stuff that people could get out of their local areas and still stay in touch with the people that they loved. And then things like, computers now we can see everywhere.
Well, we become aware, that there's another part of the world. I mean, I think Americans, I dare say, I was brought up, the geography I was, kind of brought up with was America. And then everything else was sort of a blur out here somewhere. And Canada was one of them. It was just one of those blanks up there that nobody knew anything about. At least in my schooling, I didn't get any indication that there was a country north of us. Certainly not one that's bigger than the United States. That was always a big surprise to me. I thought it was like a little state like Alaska or something.
So, and
huge
where are you
country.
at now?
I'm actually on the west coast of
Still in
Canada, off the coast of Vancouver in British Columbia, on a little island called Salt Spring Island. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, but it's a very small little island. It's an exceptionally incredible little place. It's a little mecca for artists. Everybody who lives back east, artists and everything, they eventually realize that this is like, this kind of weather is, threatening in the winter. So if you're going to starve as an artist, a lot of them come west, because at least you're not going to die if you're not making it.
Yeah, PK's up there. He's an artist. I should introduce you to. He's pretty epic.
We've met. Yeah, PK and I have met actually. He encouraged me to submit Where's Fierce Touch to a contest. What was that?
He is very encouraging and just has that spirit about himself, right?
And I just got an email last night that I won second prize. So for Where's Fierce Touch. Yeah.
Nice. Congratulations.
So that's good. Yeah. And GM3, I got to tell you, meeting a guy like that who is so prolific and sharing in his general nature, he's taught me a lot in a very short period of time about, sharing your creations. And, VRChat is ideal. I knew of VRChat back in the DK2 days, and I kind of left it to learn how to build. As soon as I went into VRChat, I was like, how am I going to figure out how to do this? Because when I first put on the Oculus, it was beyond me. I'd worked in VR on 2D screens, but I'd never really fathomed how does this stuff actually work in VR. And it took me about 6 months before I sort of gave up trying to figure it out, and I just Googled, how do you do this? And there was this little video that popped up, said, baby's first step into VR. And it was by a guy called Everyday VR. And he just, like in a 3-minute video, clarified the entire, he clarified everything in like 3 minutes. Yeah, in 3 minutes. And I was suddenly making,
he's amazing.
Oh, has he? Oh, great. Yeah, well, he was an inspiration. It took me a long time. Like, being self-taught, you tend to want to sort of learn these things so you feel you have a foundation when you arrive at a discovery. You know how you got there. So all my life I've been self-learning that way. And, in this case, I sort of, with the VR, I was so overwhelmed by what was going on in the technology of it that I simply had to ask. And Everyday VR was there for me. Baby's first step into VR. And it was just like a light bulb went off. I mean, it was just a cube on a plane, but there I was walking around it, and I thought, okay, tomorrow the world. So I spent the next 3 years working on learning Unity and learning how to do stuff, and actually released my Where's Fierce Touch for Oculus to Oculus first. And although they didn't put it in their store,
out standalone.
Where's Fierce Touch exists as a standalone. However, it's infinitely more mind-blowing in VRChat. Mainly because I'd already done it, and in the process of preparing it to work in VRChat, I ended up with all these new tools. Particularly the multiplayer aspect. I think that kind of totally blew me away. Suddenly everybody could come in, right? And when you build an
They
Oculus
can
app,
see your stuff.
you
You get instant
Yeah.
feedback. You're in
Yeah.
there with them. I mean,
Instant.
it's really powerful.
Yeah, like people like GM3 would come in and say, "Hey, what's this?" And I'd say, "Oh, okay, well, I'll change maybe some of that and just make it clearer." And that's really important when you're building interfaces and ways for people to navigate your world. You kind of want to do it without having to put signs up everywhere. Click here, to blah blah blah, and over here, click here, or too much verbiage, right? Just ends up becoming an interference. So if you can make it intuitive, then it becomes a lot more pleasurable for everybody.
With your recent world, 10,001 Dreams, really just, I think it's designed well for.
Yep. Nope.
Gunter's out.
He's gone.
Bye, Gunter.
That's nice.
Did he zoom in there? I think he was going to ask me about the way. Yeah, we'll wait for him, but I
This is just the
understand.
commercial break. It's just the commercial
Oh yeah,
break.
commercial break, right? Well, if you're looking, for, okay, well, can I be the message? Okay, here's the message. If you go to dreamscaping.com, as in landscaping, but dreamscaping, you'll find my original applications, Where Spheres Touch and Islands in Space, which are apps for the Oculus Rift. Okay, and they existed before the versions that I'm putting in VRChat, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, they still work like 100%, and for instance, Where Spheres Touch, when I originally did it, the skybox was not a massive psychedelic fractal. It actually turns out that it was a skybox I created on my front lawn. So you're actually in a sphere on my front lawn in the actual original version of it. So that's kind of interesting because you can see my car in the driveway and you can see my house and the street I live on and everything. It's basically a what you would get if you were in Google Earth VR and clicked on a bubble at my address. It's basically, I put the entire world on my front lawn, floating in a sphere. So that's kind of an interesting, sort of set and setting, very personal. And like I said, when I came into VRChat and showed GM3, he suggested maybe, something would be more compatible with all the surreal stuff I was doing. Maybe dispense with reality completely, right? And just go with, this kind of surreal thing that I ended up creating in VRChat. Yeah.
Are there more or less interactions in your standalone versions than the VRChat versions?
There are advantages to the standalone version because, of course, you're allowed to do scripting. Okay, in which I had to, when I brought it into VRChat, I had to sort of strip away all the scripts. And one of the things I liked in the standalone version was the jetpack. Is you can fly like as high as you want to go, and it's kind of. Yeah, and I think in some ways the sound is somewhat better. I'm not sure why that is. I think there's some kind of compression going on in here that is that a standalone doesn't require you to sort of limit your bandwidth so much, and I appreciate that. You give up a little bit of that. I was yesterday. I think I was in the that show that every week is held called Power Chords or something. It's a music. Site, and the sound was just like unbelievably compressed because it was streaming live and wasn't even embedded in an object. So what we had in there was, it was coming through somebody's headset, and it really, one of the things about my music you'll notice right away if you listen to it is that I'm making use of the full stereo spectrum.
Sure.
It's okay. I sort of continued. What happened?
Could you stand up and sit back down for me? And I'll explain.
You got to
so I
rename
can
the
see.
chair
There
so
we
you're
go.
not.
Yeah.
Your head isn't in an
better?
appropriate place.
Exactly.
okay?
Yes. Thank you very much. So yeah, what happened is my Comcast crashed. And luckily I have a Verizon hotspot, so I am now running on my Verizon hotspot.
Until your
to my
phone
backup
dies.
internet.
I hope
Thank you.
Nice.
And I, yeah,
Hey,
I,
artist,
well,
we
yeah,
have one
exactly.
more quick question before we get started.
Mhm.
Sarah
Yes,
wanted
yeah,
to.
sure.
Sarah Realm wanted to ask if we can
Sarah.
access your songs outside of Spheres Collide.
Yeah, the Where Spheres Touch and all my albums, like I've been recording since 1971, and literally have recorded something like 72 albums worth of material. Okay, this has been my love. This has been the whole reason I work for a living, is to be able to record and occasionally perform. And that music is available, random cuts, okay, can be heard at lightdreams.info/Paul. Every time you go to that page, it'll play a random cut from like over 300 or 400 pieces. Okay, so you'll hear instrumentals, you'll hear songwriting. You know, I move between my influences basically, which are pop songs like Beatles stuff and progressive rock stuff like King Crimson and Tangerine Dream. Alan Parsons, you know, these people all taught me, you know, as a self-taught person, I listened intently to production values that Alan Parsons was using in the production of his albums and Pink Floyd and all that. So I learned from what I feel are the best examples of, you know, people who are already doing it. And if you listen intently, you can really learn a lot about placing instruments in the
Is there any way we can buy like a discography? Yeah, I'm mangling
Yeah,
words.
Yeah, if you go to paulmarcano.com, okay, my last name is Marcano. You'll see links to samples and a complete discography of everything I've recorded since probably 1971. Did you find it, Sarah?
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I could have just
I've been
said paulmarcano.com, except that there's, you know.
I've been listening to your work all day. I've got me in a really good and groovy mood. There's quite a lot to listen to, as well as on YouTube. I mean, there's plenty of music there. There's lots of videos. You've been for like 10 years almost on YouTube.
Yeah, easily.
Something interesting. You have these influences, but something that I found interesting was you said that you don't really try to take the time to learn other people's music. You take the time to express yourself.
Yeah, my parents tried to put me into like guitar classes, and I was like, you know, you get these sheets with like G and then 5 little straight arrows, you know, so you hit that 5 times, and then you go to C and you go and hit that 3 times, and this was like driving me out of my mind. I was like, I came home from my first class and said, yeah, that's not playing music. You know, I said, it's taking me just as long to learn to play somebody else's piece of music as it would for me to just invent one. So I almost immediately decided that all that energy that I would take to learning a song would go into creating one. For a couple of selfish reasons. One, there would be no way for somebody to say, hey, that doesn't sound like that song. You know, because I could, you know, say, yeah, no, I created it. You know, so you lose that sort of comparative element in the music right away because you're listening to something new. And I believe that energy, creative energy, you know, you are being creative when you try to learn anything, but I think you have to look at that energy and kind of weigh it and say, you know, I wonder if we couldn't just use that. A lot of songs are three chords in a song, right? I mean, that can't be that hard. And it wasn't. And I continued into that realm, you know, right away. Got into recording, you know.
Doing a song a day.
Yeah, that's right. I did. I started doing a song a day just to hone my skills. I had to throw out the first 100. You know, I really did. I had to throw out the first 100. There's really there's a big steep learning curve until you sort of get to something that actually sounds reasonable, right? Yeah. I mean, it's that's part of the. I come from a family of artists, and I think in by and large, all of my family has been relatively self-taught. And because you're brought up with it, you kind of like adapt pretty quickly. Although my mother didn't think that was a good idea. She didn't encourage us to be artists. Yeah, there were 3 boys in
I
the
think
family,
I've
and she said, "Yeah,
I think I've
this is
heard
not
you.
good."
I think I heard you mention like kind of you're a naturalist, or and sort of technology could be at a conflict, but that's not the case. You embraced it, and over the years you've used different technologies. I think in the '70s you were using a 4-track.
No, I didn't
to record.
actually.
Maybe it was
In
in
the
the 80s.
70s, I started off with 2 portable cassette decks. I would record 1 track on 1 cassette, and then I would play it back while I recorded on the second deck and added the track that way. It was very primitive, but I did that a number of times back and forth until I had a 4-track recording. Then I got into reel-to-reel recording, which was sound on sound, where you could actually rewire the system so that you could take the output and plug it into the input, and back and forth go onto the right track and add another instrument, and then on the left. And then around 1980, the TIAC Corporation came out with a 4-track cassette deck, and I immediately was like, that was like 1980. Bought that and actually started recording a couple of albums, which actually Islands in Space ended up becoming the first vinyl album recorded on a 4-track TIAC cassette deck. And the TIAC Corporation came over from Japan. They were like, what are these North Americans doing recording on a tiny cassette? You know, because you have to figure, like, look at the width of a cassette and break that up into 4. And that's a very tiny 1/16 of an inch track, right? Which I would regularly wear out when I was trying to do my lead parts and stuff. I'd wear out that track and have to start over again. But those were my first stereo recordings. Anything after 1980 was always stereo.
And so you were able to cut on vinyl, and I think I saw somewhere that for collectors they can actually get a copy of the vinyl still, or is that still the case?
Well, actually, the original release of Islands in Space was 1,000 copies, which was funded by friends, and they just pushed me into that sort of realm. I mean, I generally didn't think too far down the line commercially. It was always like, I'm back at my studio recording and creating, and I've never really had anybody handle my stuff until recently. So it's been kind of more production than promotion. And VR, when it came along, I suddenly realized, wow, I can actually help visualize what I'm singing about, and kind of illustrate and become VR becomes an illustrated musical experience for me. Perfect medium to have come along. I can just say, wow, my intention is to.
You've been doing visual art for a long time as well. I saw in 1989 some what was the name of it? Fractal
Hallucinations. Yes,
that's it. Yeah. Tell me about that.
I had an Amiga computer. I was a heavy cigarette smoker, and I wanted to quit because one morning I just woke up and seemed to be coughing up a lung. So I thought, I gotta quit this smoking cigarettes, and I thought, the only thing that's going to, really solve this issue of this addiction was something I noticed, that when my mind was on something, creating something, that my mind was not thinking of cigarettes, and I thought, the things that don't make me think of smoking are things that really challenge my mind. So I went into town and bought $300 worth of software that was above my head, okay, that would require total concentration to figure out. And one of the software was called Math Vision, by 7 Seas in Portland, Oregon. And Math Vision was just kind of like a blank blackboard where you could kind of type in formulas and just see what they look like. It was a visualizer for formulas. And so I was typing in, I dug up some old, algebra and trigonometry and geometry, and started typing in formulas for simple little things. And eventually I started to realize that these formulas could interfere with each other and start creating patterns. And I got locked into that for 9 months and created like 9 major fractals of my own creation. And after that 9 months, I had completely quit smoking. I didn't even give it a second thought. I was so wired to these incredible things I was creating on the screen with just numbers. That I was just, at one point, I saw something happen on the screen that looked like water. And I was actually, there was a twinge of recognition. It was like, this looks fluid. What, this formula I've come up with looks fluid. And I decided to alter one decimal point and save the image, one decimal point and save the image. I did that 100 times until I had 100 frames where I had just altered the most minute aspect of that formula. And I loaded it into a program, and it started moving just like the patterns on water. And I was just like, oh, wow, this means, because I live by the ocean, and all those water patterns are always very fascinating and always a big mystery to me. And I thought, wow, I think I've just discovered the secret behind this whole thing. It's like the numerology of the world. Think of the influences. I could sort of see how, the boat going by, the tide coming in, going out. I could see all these influences, wind blowing on the ocean. All these sort of things had elemental numerological kind of influences on things, and I started to see the whole everything I was perceiving as a numerological consequence of almost an infinite number of different things that are happening. The whole butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon, ultimately affecting all of us in some way or fashion. I mean, that chaos theory came out of fractal theory. The idea that the interconnectivity of everything is what's creating what's happening right now.
A lot of your visual art and your music is very layered. Like you had the 4-track and you were layering on top of layers. And with your visual art, same thing with the fractal stuff, or maybe you're shooting a music video with you're in there, but maybe you're blending the universe into your being. Can you talk about that? Does that play into your life or your philosophy, or why?
Well,
why is that
my philosophy is actually pretty simple. It's not a complicated philosophy. I've arrived at a point where it's very simple. But the artistic expression is not about keeping it simple, really, because sure, you can leave the canvas blank and just use your imagination, right? I mean, from that moment on, if that happens, then you don't need much to get started. I mean, 2001 is a great example of a movie which used minimalist imagery, hardly any dialogue, maybe 20 minutes in a 3-hour movie. And yet, because the observers are watching it with their imagination, they're the ones adding the cult status to that movie. They're the ones going, what I saw on 2001 was mind-blowing. Most of it being, self-created from a few triggers.
It's an experience, that movie.
Yeah, and we're going to watch that sometime, Gunter. I've got a director's cut version that is just incredible.
Yes.
Yeah, that movie, I've probably seen that movie 20 times, if not more. I regularly put that on like a good album. I'll put that on and just boom, gone on that. It's just it's such an incredible space to free associate with if you've got ideas about things. It's kind of like I like entertainment that leaves a little free association so that you can make it up yourself, complete the picture yourself.
It is, what does the end mean, or why is there 3 minutes of just breathing? You just hear the astronaut breathing.
Eventually,
it's like he's a fish out of water or something.
Yeah, eventually you sync with that breathing, and once you sync with it, it's like, whoa, I'm it. It's me happening. There's a. I don't want to talk about another piece of software too much, but there is a piece of software called Discovering Space VR. Okay, third iteration of it. And it's available in the Oculus Store. It's called Discovering Space. And the guy introduced breathing, but not audible. When you go around the dark side of a moon, you can see your breath. So one of the things that, it's like, how incredibly first person is that? You go around this moon, it's colder, you're in a spaceship, you're just exploring, and suddenly you can see your breath. And if you sync with that, you swear it's your own breath. It's like you're cold in space, right? And so it's an awesome piece of solar system software for any. I mean, you can just go throughout our solar system in a very realistic way with that software, that's this is the VR at its this is why how many of us can be astronauts, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen, right? But in this VR universe,
have their own universe, it's
exactly.
Have
yes,
my own.
Gunter. I mean,
check it out.
It's sweet. Yeah, I mean, you could almost think of that as being narcissistic, but it isn't. The concept is that you're able to
sharing myself
to role, and the role playing, right? This whole thing is such a great medium for role play.
Yeah, I don't do it as much as in the way of my art like you do in your worlds, where you can see your paintings, or you can see this tornado medium creation. Mine is not that, but mine is sharing through voice, and I'm able to connect people and all that kind of stuff. But that's the power of VR. There's no boundary there anymore. Boom, I can be a talk show host, and I can reach out to people on the internet, and they'll come here and meet with me and meet all of you. There's no boundaries for people having to dive into your work. We can go in there. We're going to understand it a lot more by being there than if we were just looking at it on a screen.
Yeah. And VRChat is actually, to me, right at the top of the pile of VR possibilities, because it frees you, to explore so much of VR. There was a guy in yesterday who went into my 10,001 worlds. I didn't have a lot of time, but I went on the city and we went up into Islands in Space. And we made it to this, in Islands in Space, there's this little box of albums floating off of the Earth. It's hard to find, but if you're up on one of the islands that's closest to the Earth,
there's all kinds of Easter eggs and things to explore and find in there. I mean, it's just like, oh, what's that over there? Let's get to that, and find a way.
And when you get to this little box, anyway, we all jumped down and we actually made it. There were 3 of us standing on this little box of albums, and there's the Earth. And I was just saying, this is part of the reason I put this box here, is because the Earth looks like an incredible agate of glass in transformation, like almost like water, like I was saying. And this guy he said, I can't believe what I'm experiencing. And I said, yeah, it's pretty cool. Hey, he says, yeah, I just got my Oculus today. And I went, I was like,
isn't that amazing?
I can't even imagine somebody, experiencing one of my crazy worlds for the first time. I mean, I was born in the Tuscany little house there, right? That you get when you get your first Oculus, right? That was where I was born. Yeah. That was my first, and I was blown away. I can't imagine throwing myself into something like that. But he managed to jump off that island.
Was their first.
And he jumped off that island and hit that. His first day. There's no way. No way. I said, there's no way you could have jumped off that island and hit that case of, albums. Yeah. But he was so good at it, but he was like completely overwhelmed, and I love it. This is a medium that takes you to the ultimate psychedelic experience, which you can then take off the headset. You don't have to wait 18 hours for it to wear off.
That's true. Well, let's talk a little bit about psychedelics.
Did I know
that time in the 70s up until 84, I think I was reading about you and how that affected your music. How did that affect your artwork? What were those times like?
Well, it was the 70s were actually sort of obviously after the 60s, right, which were sort of almost chaotic. The 70s were a lot mellower. Your progressive rock started to come out. People were chilling on the psychedelic experience rather than maybe going out to concerts all the time. They would just kind of you'd hear songs that were 20 minutes long. So you'd sit back and you'd listen, for 20 minutes. And in the process, you'd have this amazing experience. And again, almost a subjective thing, because a lot of them were instrumentals, I mean, even you can take something as simple as Inagata Davida, right? I mean, that thing just kept repeating. And I think in the process of that repetition, it focused the minds of that generation on very much like a mantra would if you were, the repetition. And that sort of expanded into electronica as well, and even today, where you have a consistent focus. And that's enough. That's pretty much what meditation's all about, is just getting the mind to focus on a singularity, and then from there be able to see that everything else is a multiplicity of what you're imagining. So it's kind of, I think that's what's interesting about music, that it can take you to those places very readily, very handily.
Makes me think of just this story that I heard of Aboriginal tribesmen beating, going around the campfire to the beat of a drum, just getting into that mantra, until they would go 20 minutes, 30 minutes, until they claim that they had a psychedelic experience as a collective. Absolutely. I find that fascinating, that music is that powerful, that it's really deeply connected.
I find I sometimes have to educate my own generation here a little bit, because a lot of them are sort of jaded on the whole technological revolution that's taken place. Like, I don't find a lot of people, other than in VRChat, certainly nobody in my local community, who are really that much interested in VR. They're very naturalistic, and they hardly have adapted to email and computers, really. I mean, most of them have only discovered computers through tablets, and they don't, so this is what the big surprise is. Wow, I need a computer. With VR, it's like such a shock, right? Sure. Like, I mean, in a sense, Apple sort of did a retro thing by knocking us back to handheld devices, and then right at the moment when our computers were becoming pretty fascinating and mind-blowing. So, I mean, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, but at the same time, you have to ask, and in my family, we have no problem with technology. We can have a whole room full of people with, my littlest granddaughter has a iPad, and my, it's quite often we're in the same room, and I have to type in a text message to them, and they're just across the room, just to get their attention, right? Go, hey, what about this? I'm over here, it's okay. But the thing is that, you wonder, what is this fascination with the glowing light? And I really do believe that it's because we are primordial. It's the new campfire. Something. Exactly. And why we just are fascinated by a constantly moving, shifting, brilliance. And it comes full circle. We were talking in VR one day about, wow, this is great in here. We can communicate and we can talk and everything. And look, nobody's got their head buried in a phone. It's sort of like we're in the phone, full circle. We're in it now. So it's like you can actually come in here and people are talking to each other. It's cool, very cool, absolutely. An evolution. Your show starts that way. The next step, right, in human evolution is avatars. Really, I mean, really, the concept is that we can find more people who are compatible through VR, because we're so dispersed otherwise. I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I mean, can you name on one hand how many other people have VR? Not that many. It's not that saturated yet. You can only really find like minds in places like VRChat.
Yeah, of course VR is the future, but I do feel and think about it as a really profound and impacting thing. I don't think of it like, there's been some articles VR is going to die, and they're looking at the gaming aspect. But I've always thought about VR and the technology, and it's a way to take us to sort of a next level, a sort of blending of information. It's not just, we're sort of leaving the body, right? The body has been what's kept us all this time, and now we're trying to escape. Is that, maybe naturalists would think that's weird, but no. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's just all nature.
It is all nature. Absolutely. When you see fractals, and that, the fractal is like the leaf is to the tree. The tree grows like this with branches going out. You take a little leaf off of the tree and you notice it's got a main branch and a whole bunch of little branches coming off of it. That's self-replication. You see in cities, if you dissect a city, you go down to the circuit board, you could literally say that's a city. And how natural is it that the city and the circuit board look identical? I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are,
from the micro to the macro.
They're self-similar, because humans are just as natural as a tree and a leaf. And this is the way we organize our lives. I mean, it's easier to go in straight lines and find. I mean, look at New York. You know, how hard is it to figure out the map of New York City? I mean, it's, go to 2nd Avenue and 79th, I mean, it's just like, it's so easy, so we build our structures in a linear fashion that way. But it's self-replicating. It's in our tech.
Right.
It's in all the places along the way, all the way up to the overall look of the city.
It's essentially information, which is so much of us are involved in information. You're creating information. You're writing code. I mean, I find that to be fascinating. I don't write code that much, but yeah, Terence McKenna. I don't know if Terence McKenna is, but he's a really interesting thinker, philosopher, for an advocate for psychedelics and what they can do to alter consciousness and how they can benefit humankind. And he was saying stuff that like nature is information and like we're the medium. So think of VR as the next medium, but what about ourselves? It's really crazy. Ourselves as on the medium and like these memes, these self-replicating. We are becoming memes. I see memes everywhere. We are just spreading and replicating, and we can do it instantly. We do it fast, and it's happening, it's blowing up. I think VR is going to, it's going to be this exponential thing into. I
think it's already crossed the threshold.
You can't see though. There's something we can't see. I feel like it's
VRChat actually is on the frontier. I don't know if they realize it, because I've been through a lot of the games and all the things that are happening. Right. You get a lot of free stuff when you get the touch and everything, and it's wonderful to, play a game in VR.
Medium's cool. But it's nice that there is, some tools.
Yeah, and there's lots of tools starting to come out, and a lot of companies are realizing, hey, if I'm going to build something, you might as well have it in front of you, right? So augmented realities are starting to happen. But the thing about VR that's they keep saying that augmented reality is going to be more useful, I suppose. And in a practical sense, they may be correct. But I'm not going to make any bones here. I'm in VR to escape. Okay? And the less of the world around me that is observable or noticeable, the better. The more immersed I get into a created form, the more I'm getting to where I want to be. And I'm not, I'm not saying that because I like to just escape the world. I'm just saying that if I'm going to have an altered state of experience or some kind of a journey or an exploration, I like it to be full on. I want to be convinced that it's happening, and I want to be there. An augmented one would put something, be great for communication, right? Augmented's great. I can put, people that live 3,000 miles away can sit on my couch. They can sit on my couch. We can have a chat that way. But that's all about that kind of thing. Whereas, where's Sphere's touch? You come in there, you suspend your disbelief, right? It's like, what the hell's really going on here?
Augmentation. VR is like the ultimate augmented reality. You've completely, the words are crazy though. Mixed reality, it doesn't. The words are. We're still trying to figure out the language of this stuff. Still trying to figure out how to traverse these things. They probably are very similar and one and the same.
You ever see that movie Brainstorm?
Oh yeah, I got a poster of it right here on the
wall. Okay. Well, when that came out, I have to tell you, that was like 1982 or something.
Yeah.
But that movie, you realize right there and then. Remember how bulky the original version was?
Oh yeah.
And then it was.
Awesome,
and then she redesigned this tight little unit. And you see that this whole thing is going to be redesigned, it's going to be continually modified and streamed and streamlined until it becomes almost, yeah. I was very surprised actually that Google Glass ever made it. Other than the sense that everybody at a party wanted to run as soon as the guy showed up with his Google Glass.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Maybe it's that thing, the social implications of having tools like that on their head. It's going to change society. And maybe I wonder when everybody's got their augmented reality kicking here in 5 or 10 years, what that's going to do to the world, and if we sort of accept it.
I think it's going to threaten our privacy a little bit too much, because look at what's happening. The more we sort of open up our technology to exposing our private life, the more it's being used against us. Okay, at the same time. Go for a job interview. Oh, well, let's see what kind of bullshit this potential employee has been, any little thing you say. Look what happened to, what's his name? The inventor of the Oculus, Lucky. He made that political, move on his own accord. He has every right, as anybody does, to support whoever he wants. That's what a free country's all about and everything. But then here's this guy, eventually, sort of had to be kind of slowly moved out of Facebook and away from Oculus. And now, now he's in someplace in, the Middle East or something. No, I think he's over in the Taiwan or something. He had to actually leave the country or something. It was horrible what happened to him. And I just feel that this kind of thing with privacy ought to be taken with, carefully. And I think when Google Glass came out and people started going to parties and you were talking to somebody who was actually streaming you, right? You might not want your conversations shared that widely. And I think that there needs to be some point at which you say, okay, there ought to be a safe place somewhere where we can talk and not worry about it, And that's
the culture's strange.
We may find that VR is the place where you can do that.
Yeah, you could escape it. There's a lot of shaming people and witch hunts and pointing at and people that feel like they got the high road and they want to kick people that are on the low road. But
it's unfortunate.
VR
of course,
save us.
VR is a respite. We'll have a respite, a place where you can come to say what's on your mind. And other than shows like this, which are being streamed, I've had lots of conversations in VR that have been very, intimate and just me and the person I'm talking to. And I like that, A lot of the earlier worlds, like, Active Worlds came along in the 90s. Second Life in the early... Yeah, Active Worlds was one of the very first places that I started making a living in VR, okay? And I should mention this because a lot of people are wondering how to monetize VR, okay? And I've, as an artist, I learned sort of early on that really, there's an instability to just doing art for art's sake and expecting to make a living, okay? That's really, you create a piece of art that's really unique, and you're only going to find maybe, you're going to find the exact client who wants that. The customer is going to come along and go, oh, that's awesome, I'll buy that, And they might give you somewhere near what you need to get from it. But I think I learned really early that the best way to make a living in the arts is not so much, you go ahead and you do your art, you express yourself, but rely on trying to apply those talents to something that is in service of other people's needs, okay? And hence you start looking at commercial art and commercial applications of things as they move along. And when Active Worlds came along, it was really at a point where I had already been making my living with web design. And when Active Worlds came along, I knew right away what I actually wanted to do, which was create worlds. Okay. And so my first job was a very simple gallery for a photographer who was willing to pay me $500 to build a virtual world. Not a world so much, but a gallery.
Worlds, I think we need to just kind of briefly explain what that is. It's not Second Life, but you could easily use that as a way to start explaining it. It's a platform that exists
to this day, okay? I mean, I just, believe it or not, I did a concert in there in April, okay? Because I custom, I paid to get 4 players for my band, okay? Because I have all this music, right? So I thought, I'm going to stream this stuff in concerts in virtual worlds. And so I created a band called Aztec Rising, okay? And Aztec Rising was basically me on guitar, me on drums, me on bass, and me on keyboards, okay? And I was streaming it, and all the avatars looked different, and they all had their own animations and everything. I had them all synced up using AIs, little, just little characters that would run the animations for everybody else. And the band actually, to stream the music, I added in audience sounds and cheering and, just made it sound like a totally live show. And in a virtual world, that actually worked in Active Worlds. And I did an Earth Day concert in there that was heavily promoted. Yeah, had like, at the time it was really great. We had 50 people in world watching the concert, and we had another whole bunch of people just listening to it over the simulcast of the air.
So cool.
And yeah, it was a really cool thing. We had full-on light show. Everything was happening. And, that sort of established a series of concerts I ended up doing using the Active Worlds platform. And in April, they invited me back into that universe. I said, well, I'm kind of into a different thing now, it's a little more dimensional, And so I said, but I think I can figure out a way to do this.
Definitely into
and
it.
And I said, I'm going to run Active Worlds in a desktop VR thing, right? So I ran Active Worlds in big screen, if you know
Sure.
big screen, right, where you can actually share your desktop. So I ran Active Worlds in there, placed my band on a stage there again, and did the entire concert in there. And it was awesome because, I was able to speak from my virtual reality, which I was actually in the theater in big screen, right? And saying, well, welcome to VR, this is the bridge between those two platforms, right? And yeah, they're still going. Active Worlds is a builder's paradise for early, that came around very early
for a long
on.
time.
Yeah, it's been around for over 20 years. And then Second Life, which came along later, and I did a lot of lounge playing in there with streaming and stuff. That one came along a little later. It had its own built-in interface, so it was pretty cool too. And now it's gone on and created that Sansar thing, which is you and I are going to be able to build in world. Because that's one thing about VRChat that still needs some work, and that is when you have to upload the entire world each time you want to update it, and then get it reinitialized and all the rest of it. It's like if I go into Where Spheres Touch right now and I just wanted to add one little thing, right, it would be a total, have to, risk uploading a whole new version basically. And I think
there's some barriers to entry with
I'm not sure what's
creating in VRChat, right?
Yeah. I don't know what that is. Like why it has to upload the whole thing. It's not the place to complain.
I don't think that's the case. We can help you with that. I actually think that you don't have to upload the whole build every time. Yeah.
That would be nice. Because it seems to take forever. And then you check it and you go, oh fuck, excuse me, it's not right, and then you have to do it again. But like you said,
creating in world though and in games is going to be, that's the power. Every social app's going to have this ability. It's just fundamental.
Yeah. In Medium, GM3 and I have been in Medium. Kingspray is multiple use. It's the tools. Yeah. Once the tools become multiple, that's going to be amazing, right? You work on that part. I'll work over here. It's awesome. Absolutely awesome.
So before Active Worlds, or maybe around the same time, you were doing stuff in the Duke Nukem engine. This blows my mind. You're in the art gallery in the Duke Nukem. I mean, you're like the pioneer with this kind of stuff. Machinima, or I don't know, man. Just explain that to me. Why? How?
Well, that was crazy because I didn't even know about Duke Nukem. I went over, my nephew was playing on the computer. He seemed addicted to this game, and I went, what the hell is this? You're just killing everything in sight. What the hell is this? And I picked up the disc and I said, oh, okay, Duke Nukem, of course. Duke Nukem, nuke them all, And I looked at the back of it and it said, build your own levels, get into, make something with this. And I thought, really? This allows you to build. And he was like, playing on his joystick, and I said, you mind if I borrow this? Yeah, go ahead, and I kind of walked away with this disc, plugged it into my computer and loaded it up and started looking at what was involved in building levels. And I really dissected the parts of it until I could figure out where all the graphics were, where all the textures were being held, where all the weaponry was, where everything was. And I began to, I just tried a really simple little thing at first. I thought, I'm just going to make my house. So, I just started building my studio and my bedroom and, the front, the front, because we were right on the water. So I had like a little island out in front of me that I built. And And then I went back and I showed it to my nephew, who was like absolutely blown away. And he said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, you just put that disc in there and check out the level builder." And he went and built his own house. And then we joined the two maps together, and we ended up spending a good couple of weeks just Duke Nukeming each other, having a riot of a time online with a little modem, right? And just totally tripping out on the fact that we had done our entire property and the islands and everything. And we were just like it was killing us. And then I was part of this sort of art group, and I just mentioned to them, I said, "Do you think you'd be into maybe having a virtual gallery, Does anybody see that as being a plausible thing?" And none of them did. But I said, "Listen, if there's people here working with Amiga computers and with PCs, I said, if there's 10 people here, I'll do it." And there were 10 people who happened to have gotten onto computers. Wow. And I said, "Okay, well, send me, 10 images each." And we began building galleries in the Duke Nukem engine. And my nephew, who just became an ace at building stuff in there, he built an entire subway system that connected all the galleries. So you're actually in a subway, getting off at Marcano Avenue and going into this gallery, and then going on down the road, and you go into another artist gallery. And the whole thing, we had teleports going. We had like full on interactive gallery we called the show All But There. And that was based on the definition of virtual reality as engineers see virtual reality. Virtual reality in an engineer's world is a simulation that is all but there. And I just thought that sounded really good, all but there. And that's what this is. It's kind of like, really, when you look about it, we're all but there, right? I mean, it's amazing. So that became we ended up installing that entire disk on multiple computers in our local community, gallery, bookstore, kiosks, right? And it was like running, and people would go in and see the show just on these kiosks. Personally, I had to go around to each location and install it properly and tell them how to use it and everything, but it was great. Wow. It was very first.
Man, you're really an early adopter, or early adopter.
That's because I don't just adopt things. I actually feel like I have to find a practical way to make it work. And,
you adapt it to your creative lifestyle. Maybe.
Well, also some kind of practical application. It's always nice to have a practical application. If you look at, if everybody sort of wonders on how to monetize VR, and I've been monetizing it all along the way because I'm going to have to survive in order to work in this medium. And when I met GM3, it was one of the things I said to him. I said, "How can you do this without you need to make a living here, man. I mean, how are you going to, because it takes time, right? It takes months. It takes, literally can take a year or two to even learn enough to get something going. And you need to figure out a way to, unless you have another job that's super high paying or whatever, the time it takes to learn this stuff requires that it has some kind of monetization sort of associated with it. So every now and again, I'll do a commercial job where I'll apply this stuff to it. And so like I did that first gallery, that was a paying gig, not the Duke Nukem one, but my first Active Worlds gallery with photos. That was like $500. But hey, it supported me to do that. And it was 1996, a dollar was worth, whatever it was.
Sure.
And then as I moved along, I realized, more and better applications, more commercial applications. And I think the next one was a thing called the Arts Highway, which was basically a highway with galleries along the highway, and each one dedicated to an artist. So that artists could have as many shows as they wanted. Like instead of you go to a normal gallery, you might get one show every year. But in the virtual world, of course, you can have every Friday night, you can have an opening. Right? Mm-hmm. You can show all your new stuff or whatever you're working on. So I created this thing called the Arts Highway. And that was with I had shown that to one of these I don't know how it happened that I happened to have the Ministry of Municipal Affairs came to my house through another friend who was trying to get something happening, and they were trying to say that I might be helpful. And I sat him in front of my computer and showed him the previous, gallery I'd done for the photographer. And he was like, that was it. He was like, oh, this is what we want, And I said, oh, great. He says, and he just said, yeah, how much do you need, And I thought, well, 500 isn't going to do it. How about 3,500? And that was my next job, and that one kind of linked off to, that created the space for other experiments, because along that highway, I ended up making a mall with lots of little stores in it. And some random people from Vancouver who were not into VR at all somehow saw that online and contacted me and said, can you make us a virtual reality mall, 100 stores? And I was like, well, probably. And I said,
Wow.
but you should come in and experience this to see it. So I turned them on to Active Worlds and brought them in. And they saw that and they said, yes, fine, we'll pay you to do that. So, you sort of see this incremental progression of what this stuff is worth in the real world, okay? Because it is worth something, okay? It's worth, it has monetary value. It has, you connect with the right people, people who are just as interested as you are. They maybe don't have your abilities because we're all learning in here this incredible medium, right? But the more you spend time in here, the more you are at an advantage over people who are just coming into it for the first time. And I've always sort of wanted, that's why I've always sort of hung out on the frontier of the tech, because, I sort of move on once everybody else is doing it. Like once everybody started doing websites, once Wix came along and, hey, I can get a website for free. Well, how much can you charge for a website after you can get one for free, right? So, I stopped doing websites around 2007. Started devoting myself to virtual reality. And just through Active Worlds, I haven't actually picked up my first job yet in VR, so to speak, like this kind of VR, but my last job in Active Worlds was easily, oh my gosh, that was maybe $50,000 to build that world. It was serious money. And from what I can, from what I can tell you, if you're curious about what it's worth, I would have to say 500, 3,500, 30,000, 50. What's the next one? Probably closer to 100, right? Because the application, what's happening here in VRChat and what's happening in all the virtual, anything outside the game world, because most of the game world is really just replicating what's already been done before. Shoot 'em ups and, boom, boom. And you get this sort of, natural things that come along. They're just sort of adapting old to the new display features, right? And I think that's a big mistake if you think it's limited to that, because every single one of these mediums has its strengths in one particular thing that it does that cannot be done anywhere else. And I'll just say one thing in particular, physics. Take the physics effect in Unity. When you have an object and you take the gravity off of it. Nexlin, I don't know if he's in the audience tonight, but Nexlin, made this object, he threw it at me, and it tumbled past me, and I was like, this is amazing, I can make an object that is completely weightless. And I started playing around with that, and you can bend the rules. And so we're in this VR sort of universe where there's a whole bunch of new potential here that goes beyond what's even capable in the real world. So why not start fooling around with it, right? And I think if you go into, I'll just say this about 10,001 Dreams, if you go up in that city on the island and you don't go into the portals up there and come back down, try jumping when that city is descending, because you will find that you've got almost complete weightlessness. Because the city is dropping, you do a jump, you actually jump easily as high as you would on the moon, okay? And it made me think, You know how they take a parabolic curve with planes to give astronauts a taste of weightlessness? They sort of bring them up to a peak, and then they drop the plane really quickly, and they lift off. And they get about 3 minutes of pure weightlessness. Well, in VR, you can do that. You can take that island up there and drop it at a certain rate, and you become weightless. And if you time it exactly at a certain point, you can stay relative to it. You'll only go up so high, and it's a riot just jumping around up there. It's fantastic. When that thing is dropping, you get this real buoyant sense, even more than just a jump like you would normally get in VRChat. It actually doubles the effect, triples it. Really cool.
Yeah, I've obviously been doing VR for a while, and my first social VR was Minecraft, and we used Minecraft not to just as a gaming thing, but as a whole bunch of 30-year-olds that found the DK1 that got together, and I was like, wow, there's people like us out there, very similar growing up, and then started trying to do talk show stuff, but had to get off Minecraft because that really wasn't feasible for something. It was very boring looking, very blocky, right? But there was a lot of scale in there. So when I'd fall, you get the sense of falling. In your world, I was surprised that I was taken aback as much as I was. That I was really interested once I was slowly rising, how the tension of how far I was getting up really grabbed at me, because I've played a lot of VR, the climb or other things, but this was really, really interesting. I don't know.
Well, I'm so glad you enjoyed that, because that world that one's been worked on periodically over a couple of years, but in the last 3 months I decided to buckle down and figure out how to get that world together, because it had a lot to offer. It was a landscape that I thought would intrigue people. And I thought, as far as my whole thing is my music, of course, so I'm looking to create immersive environments where you take a little bit of time to sit down and listen to a song. You might not like every song, but along the way you might find something that you like.
Well, let's describe 10,001 Dreams a little more. What you will experience in there.
Well, it's a hiking world. Fundamentally, a hiking world based on replicating a lot of what you see in nature. It has a complete day-night sequence, so that if you stay in there long enough, you'll see the sunset, and then you'll see the sunrise, and it's all sped up somewhat, not too fast, but speedy enough that the shadows on the ground are moving. Okay, and I've always liked that effect in time lapse, where if you photograph in a forest, you can see the shadows sort of blanketing all the contours. And I always thought that was an incredible effect. And so I sped up the light. The light is actually attached, the main light source is attached to the sky, a bubble. And so it naturally rises and sets and ends up, in effect, at noon or at midnight, below you. So it's actually in a complete circle. So some of the objects I've left reflectors on, so that it looks like they're like the mushrooms when the sun is at, furthest away, the mushrooms light up from underneath and they glow, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And and those mushrooms were done in medium, right? I created those in medium.
Oh, cool.
And yeah. And so and I wanted it to be natural. I really wanted to sort of start. It's really the starting point. I ended up making it after I did Where's Fierce Touch and Islands in Space, but it's actually the first world. It's actually where I would suggest that people start on Earth, and just appreciating that we can replicate a walk in the woods or a walk along a path and hang out with some waterfalls and just enjoy the sounds of nature and the things like that. And at first you think, okay, well that's okay. But by adding the music to it, I've added a conceptual element, an element that sort of takes some of those sense impressions and the music describes, if you listen carefully, it's describing what you're experiencing. And a lot of my music, when I was saying that my philosophy is pretty simple. You have this consciousness but you also have this other thing, self-awareness. And I think that in respect of maintaining a philosophical calm or centeredness, being aware that actually the sense impressions you're getting through all your senses are titillating and tripping out your consciousness. But even that is not the place that is really the you, because you is like the person who's aware that you're being affected by all these sense impressions and everything. It's you who's aware that you have a thought. It's you
The
that's
mind.
having, there's a background sort of witness to the whole event that is the better part to sort of associate with, because it's actually beyond duality. When a thought enters, you may feel this way or that way about it, but there's still this other part of you that's actually making the choices of whether or not to get down about it or up about it or this way or that. When in fact, there's philosophically speaking, you actually, when you look at it, you say, gosh, I actually don't have to make a choice as to whether to think positively or think negatively, because neither of those choices are actually the essential deciding aspect of yourself. And I think that's my music all points to that. Like that song we were listening to, who is the one who sees it all, is really an allusion to that, because the whole chorus line in there, your own awareness, never born and never dying kind of thing, that's an interesting Tibetan, that's an ancient Tibetan revelation, really. These guys hang out in the hills for thousands of years, and they come to this realization that that consciousness is born into awareness and not the other way around. And in many respects, consciousness is a dangerous thing without self-awareness. You see a lot of people who are hyper conscious. They can use their consciousness to manipulate the entire world around them, but without self-awareness, they don't even know what they're saying half the time. That's actually destroying things, right? Without self-awareness, you're liable to say anything.
These times,
you're liable to say
immediately,
anything. And it's like
anybody in the world.
you have a little awareness of what the impact of your words are. I mean, that's an important thing we're probably going to
the butterfly effect, the cause and effect. It's all
exactly.
I guess the rate at which it's happening now is quite,
it's phenomenal. So yeah,
exactly.
I mean, I think if people develop just their self-awareness, they'll realize that it's fun. That there's like all these sense impressions. The consciousness can have as much fun as it wants, but you don't have to get caught up in it. You don't have to get stressed out. You don't have to, none of it's any realer than this, and this is as real as anything else.
VR gets to be this amazing teacher for us.
I think so. I think it actually forces you to. My first impression in that Tuscany, when I finally put the disc in and decided to install the Oculus, it had been sitting on my couch for a couple of weeks because I was working on another project, and I knew if I installed that Oculus that I would never finish the project I was on. So 2:00 one night, I said, I'm finished. Now I'm going to plug that thing in. And I thought, it's 2 in the morning. I maybe shouldn't do that, but I will. And I went over, plugged it in, and ended up in that Tuscany thing. I was just like, oh my God. I could see
it's really 3D.
Yeah, I could feel the goosebumps. I was just like, no way. I never imagined that VR, basically the holodeck, was going to be something I put on my head instead of going inside a room. I had always been kind of thinking, well, I'm going to have to prepare one of our bedrooms for a holodeck. I know this technology is going to get to that point. And I thought, I'm going to take that bedroom and convert it, maybe pad it a bit. And, I had all these ideas about VR. And then when the Oculus came out, I put it on my head and I went, oh, wait a minute. I don't need a room. I just need a closet. That was the first thing I said to my wife. I don't need a room. I don't need a studio anymore. Look at the vastness of the space we've got, and we haven't even moved like 2 inches from where we are. Right. And you just like, wow. Yeah. That's a major revelation for most people to grasp, really, is just like that the holodeck is on your head, which actually leads to the final sort of revelation, which is that your head, in the world around you in any context is a holographic concept, really. I mean, it's really interesting.
It sort of does generate consciousness in its own way. It sort of creates a virtual reality based on certain input that we're interpreting, so it's not like we experience the real reality out there.
It's an interpretation.
It's an interpretation. It can be.
I think we all interpret it the best we can. You're interpreting it from over there. I'm interpreting it from over here. And how many miles apart are we? Thousands. Here we are. I mean, this is the beauty of the sort of presence, right? The presence that VR is. It's like this incredible concept. Just an incredible concept. Yeah.
If you guys have questions or thoughts, spit them out. I do want to ask, where do you want this technology to go, or where do you see it going further, 10, 50, 100 years? You decide.
Well, I'll be honest with you. There's been points along the technological evolution of things where I've said, time to become a pea farmer. Or, I'm done with this. I'm done with this, right? I mean, I get into this. I get into these things where I saturate myself with the tech, and then I get to this point where, okay, well, I think I've taken that as far as it can go. Maybe I should just take up farming or something, But I do come from a kind of an egalitarian viewpoint, which was in the 70s and the 60s, right? It was like a little bit egalitarian, a little bit, agra. First Earth Day was in, 1975 or something, I mean, we were focused on communal farms and trippy, living outside and getting in with nature. And I was like that for all the 70s. It really wasn't until I read Gerard O'Neill's High Frontier that I gave any credence to technology. And he describes in that book, he's an astrophysicist who described that it's far more practical to build islands in space and colonies in space, habitat in space, more practical, easier to manage the recycling of elements and things, and being away from the elements really was easier than terraforming an entire planet. So he put forth the idea of islands in space because they're independent, and you can have a C-109 Calcutta as well as a New York, and you can still have your cultural, you can preserve your culture even in space. So you would have, and he was proposing these things would float in geosynchronous orbit, so that you would, over every country, you could be out in this Lagrange point 5, which is apparently where everything is in geosynchronous orbit, so that, your islands are actually associated with your ground-based culture as well. And so your communication lines and everything were, he had this great idea because it was like, and he says, you don't want to be lifting everything off of the planet. That's too expensive. I mean, at that time he was saying it's like $1 million to lift a piece of matter off the Earth that's the size of an orange or something. He says, very expensive. He says, but if you go to the moon and create what he called mass drivers, which ran along basically just a mining trolley filled with moon material, running along a train track at a certain velocity because of the low gravity on the moon. He says, all you need at the end of that track is a full stop, and the entire contents of that trolley car will dump itself into space, and you have a big catcher's mitt out there that catches all this moon material, funnels it into a furnace, and out the other end extrude your lattices that you need to build your colonies. It was a very simple breakdown of how that could actually work in a practical physical fashion. So you could extrude I-beams that are, in solar furnaces, burning at incredible speed, cheap. So I thought that was, that blew my mind. And I started thinking about technology in a much more positive fashion after that. And that's when I wrote the album.
With VR, we can kind of prototype that person's that big grand idea. You start playing with the physics of it all.
Sorry, I just fell out of my chair.
Okay.
That's what I've kind of done with the with Islands in Space. I really wanted to illustrate that. I really wanted to try to illustrate Islands in Space. Like, there's nothing practical about that world that I created. There's no way it would actually look like that. But I'm an artist. I get to do that. That's my artistic license. you know, flat islands and, this whole sort of thing. I'm not afraid to use artistic license to further the, just a conceptual idea. And make it more interesting in that respect. Sometimes practical is a little boring and rigid.
Does anybody in the audience have any thoughts, questions, opinions, disagreements?
My question was: does the multiplayer, aspect of your art in VRChat have any effect on your creative process?
Yeah, and I was saying earlier that when I first brought Where Spheres Touch into VRChat, I brought GM3 in, and he was immediately, offering me feedback, things that I wasn't able to do while I was in development of it, because there's no way to share an app unless you build multiplayer into it, and I'm really not that advanced when it comes to programming. I can create lots of stuff, but code-wise, I'm more of a hacker. I'll find something that does what it should do, and then I'll hack it to, customize it for my own purposes. But I have no idea what a lot of that code is trying to say. No way. That's not my forte.
I think we have a couple hackers here and here. We got some thumbs up and a smiley face. So
I have never hacked anything.
No, you sure? Actually, there's a few people in here who have names that kind of like Hack Spanner or something. Or
sure.
I've seen a few people that obviously fool around with code. But it's not really used in VRChat anyway. Like, scripting and those things. I had to take them all out of my app after painfully integrating them into my application. I find out in VRChat that you're not even allowed to use them. So I thought, wow. Well, isn't that great? No more of that. So now I do everything using the animator. I use all the but the animation tool is incredible in Unity. The fact that you can run animations, I've learned so much about integrating. And a little secret I learned in 10,001 Dreams with that blimp that is a tour right around the world was I had a hell of a time taking that blimp and actually getting it to follow the path I wanted it to follow. And then I realized I'm going to just create a cube and see if I can animate the cube to do what I want it to do. And it was so much easier. And then I just took the blimp and childed it to the cube. And I got perfect arcs, right? By just simply rotating the cube, I was actually able to rotate and curve that blimp just perfect, exactly the way I wanted to do it. Move it along in a straight line, have it take a left, have it drop in altitude on a perfect curve. It was so much easier than actually taking this full-blown object with all the bits and pieces and everything and defining a perfect path for it. So that's just a little something about that world. I'm always sort of discovering a lot of stuff that people already know. And I think I just discovered something. But it turns out that most people already know this stuff, right? It's like, that's the value in an education. It's
pretty interesting, the limit,
jump on things.
The limits on what you're able to create. And this goes, I think, with all tools and creation. Sometimes having limits is a good thing, and it sort of forces you to play within there. And it's really amazing how much can come just from a limited tool set. If you make things happen there, when the tool set expands,
the key word there is innovation, right? Being innovative and, in a sense, being very jazz-like. Improv. You improvise. And that actually leads to simpler solutions to very complex problems. Really. When you start to look at what jazz and improvisation is all about, you realize that you're really bringing things down to their elemental. And those kind of solutions are pretty insightful, because really solutions ought to be simplified. There shouldn't be this whole, it's so complicated. I think solutions, the really good ones, are marvelously, really? Well, like VR, right? The holodeck. That was a very complicated concept that Star Trek was presenting. And then when I put the headset on, I went, no, it isn't. This is the point of view. This is, that solved it. And look at the simplicity of that. That's pretty awesome when you consider how complicated it would be to build a holodeck.
Sure.
Just think about it. I mean, I saw people trying it out in Europe with backpacks and laptops, and they're in a big room, and they're being, got
Cage
tracking
systems,
everywhere. They got 1,000 wires, and the whole thing is just total. And I'm thinking, why are you guys going retro on this when the solution has arrived, and it's simple, and it doesn't require a massive warehouse to pretend to be actually walking all over the place. It just doesn't make sense. There's no efficiency in that concept. I mean, it's cool, and it'd be probably good for a theme park, but for the average person who just wants to time travel, space travel, Google Earth travel, I'll take the headset. Thank you very much.
Teleport, yeah.
Yeah, teleports and VRChat.
Consciousness anywhere.
Yeah,
anywhere.
Exactly.
In the world or in not the world, in Gunter's universe. You teleport
in
yourself
Gunter's universe. Come here and actually be on a talk show. Isn't that crazy?
Who would have thought? I would have thought.
Who would have thought?
That's for sure.
Yeah, that's great, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any last things before we wrap it up here? Another one, Rubik? Yeah.
Because of your history with the technologies, and because you've seen them, I'm not going to say die, but you've seen them at least be born, and you were there to see them, do you think you're going to see VR die, or do you think VR is going to be there for like a long time? Because it seems to be satisfying your creative needs for now, but maybe at some point you're just going to move on to something better.
My biggest worry about VR, and it's not really a worry so much as, I'm a little older, okay? And right now, no problem. Eyes are great, hearing's great, everything's great, right? But if you look at what happens, I see it happening with my parents and everything else, the senses are the first to kind of get compromised over time. And VR is not going to be because of anything other than just the physical power to use it. But as far as me thinking what, the future of it, I'm absolutely 100%, 110% convinced that it is the solution for a lot of people who want to travel, don't have a big budget, who want to fantasize, don't have, movies are too, just not convincing enough. There's just too many things happening in virtual reality right now that put it well over the edge and positioned for a mind-blowing, evolving future. I mean, it can only get even more amazing. And I really don't think that we're anywhere. You read these articles, it's dead, yeah, sure. Come in here and check it out on any given day. Gamers and certainly
dead.
those
They're
guys
dead inside. That's what the problem is.
Yeah, but also you look at what was that company? They make a big thing about this company in Iceland that was responsible for Valkyrie, who are saying, we're not going to be putting
Valkyrie.
We're not putting any more money into VR because it hasn't really panned out to be the cash cow that we thought it was going to be, etc. Yeah, but I mean, you guys are like. This is like another shoot 'em up. Like I don't expect those guys to be able to make a living at that. I mean, that's not an application that compels anybody. It's fun, and there's a certain amount of it that I spent a lot of time in VR, Valkyrie, and enjoyed being in a spaceship and everything. But I actually prefer discovering space because discovering space is you're in a spaceship. You can go anywhere you want to go. Like you're in the ship and you got full solar system to deal with. You can even go out to that comet, that one that the European Space Agency went to, and they landed that little Phaedra guy on there. You can go out to that comet in there, and it is like you feel like you are out there. It's an amazing, like, the only thing that comes to my mind in that one is, I wish you were here. That's all, it's just like, wow, I don't care what anybody says. I'm out there. And I'm out by this comet, and I'm orbiting it, and I'm looking for that little Phaedra thing, and I actually found it. And I'm just like, this is awesome. For an individual to travel the solar system, see all the latest planet maps for Europa and for, moons of Jupiter, all that's been updated in that Discovering Space thing. And you can go to the space station, you can orbit it with your own ship, you can fly down to the surface of Venus and Mars and dive into the heart of the sun. I mean, these are things that we would never have dreamed that we were able to do. I always wanted to be an astronaut, but, it requires a fair amount of, you need to be an ex-fighter pilot, which also means you got to be pretty military in your thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of prerequisites to becoming an astronaut that aren't exactly everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
But here in VR, you get in a spaceship and you head off to Venus or Mars, and you're there, and, that's fine. I don't mind that it's, anybody that tries to say it isn't real is kind of, fooling themselves that, that one thing is more real than another thing. I mean, I don't think so. I think if you learn something from a dream at night, that's a real learning experience. You can parse it and say, I just dreamt it, but it doesn't matter. If it had an impact on you and altered your thinking, everything does that. You just have to be receptive to. Just be receptive, to the, like you were saying earlier, synchronicity, right? If you're receptive to synchronicity, you start to realize that things are unfolding,
everything.
In a very magical way. I mean, I'd be the first person.
This is all magic in a way. It's manifested. It's amazing.
Yeah. And if you take it personally, you're going to get a lot out of it. Take it personally.
Yeah, sure.
What you're hearing
I put my name on the universe.
I take this personally. I take this personally.
All right, so we went from you didn't know if Canada exists and thought it was a state, all the way to exploring the depths of
Mars,
the universe to the sun.
The rings of Saturn.
Hey, Gunter, do we have time for one more question?
One more. Let's do it.
All right, so artist, this is from Sarah, Sarah Realm.
Yeah.
And her question is, what are the next horizons you see in a world to create? And her second question is the growth of self or environment on the docket for you?
Is what?
Is the growth of self or environment on the docket?
Oh, well, being an old school, everything being one, and I would say that the observer, self, and environment are a mutual reflection of each other, because the environment isn't going to look very interesting if you don't take an interest in it. That's just the facts. It's a lot of people who pretend that there's such a thing as boredom are simply not taking an interest. And I think that you could actually take that to a horrible conclusion, which was like, even if you were jailed, right? You'd have to sort of say, well, this is what I've got to work with, make it interesting. And so for me, VR is really about that, because, we really are able to take our inner vision of things and create sort of a version of it that you can share with other people. So yeah, I'm very optimistic about that. What was the first part of that question?
What are the next horizons you see in a world you want to create?
Well, I was actually, I was just in a world called The Surrogate, and it was just released on Oculus not too long ago. Actually, I think today. I downloaded it for a quick peek. And I was really interested in that. That was a very interesting use of spherical video and computer-generated environments. So you go down these halls and you look out the window, and what they've done is they've put spherical photographs and video and a whole story that's linked. Very interesting. I immediately thought, wow, that's what I want. But VRChat has a little bit of a limit on this whole video thing, huh? Because your world can only be 10 gigs or something, right?
You will.
So if you brought video,
you will be able to have 360 videos planned, and you have those videos someday in here. It's happened in the past. These are tools, things that we want to open up. Other software does these things, so yeah.
Once that happens,
sharing your 360 videos in here. Yeah,
all bets are off, because now you're merging the virtual universe with the real. Video is like amazing, and I don't know whether anybody here does 360 video, music videos, but if you've seen any of the ones that I've created, I've tricked the system into acknowledging its limitations, okay? And particularly with music videos, okay? Because one of the problems that you have, and I have a 360 camera, I have one of those little Nikons, and I can place that in an environment and get a nice 360, but it isn't as good a resolution as this bloody table, okay? This table has better resolution than any kind of optical capture system that I've ever seen. I haven't seen a video yet that matches VRChat in virtual and computer-generated environments. Okay, so they're ace. But when I make a music video, what I do is I shoot my performance up against a blue screen or a green screen, and I embed it into the 360 computer generated.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So if you go into my YouTube channel, a lot of my more recent music videos are me embedding myself in, like that fractal one called Everything is Wonder. If you look at that video, the background was generated in a program called Mandelbulb 3D, which is a fractal generating 360 environment, which is what I use in VRChat Touch, which is this incredibly high resolution fractal. And so in Mandelbulb, you can generate a spherical image that's 10,000 pixels across, okay? I mean, that is a lot of detail. And if you take that and move it into a 4K video format using a 4K editor, like I use Magic's Movie Edit Pro, and it takes these 4K images, and then I blue screen myself in there using an HD camera, so that I'm actually matching the resolution by not trying to videotape myself at 4K, but rather HD, and then embedding myself using green screen into the video. And this leads to an overall good-looking resolution result without having to, obviously you can buy some pretty expensive 360 cameras, but the good ones are $15,000, $20,000, $30,000.
Yeah.
The Nikon I've got maybe cost me $700. I mean, it wasn't really, it's great, but it's not. It's more for recording Thanksgiving dinners and stuff, and being able to watch everybody, having dinner later on, down the road, the trip. So yeah, I like.
Totally.
Again, it comes back to the improvisation and being innovative with the tools you've got. If I don't have a high resolution 360 camera, I generate all my environment with computers and embed myself in HD fashion, which actually turns out that the image for me only has to be a very tiny little thing, because of the scale of VR, right? Like it actually works. It actually works rather good, and I can do that either in 2D or 3D.
Sure. Well, this has been wonderful. I'm glad you came on the show. Thank you so much. How can people find your work?
Oh, yeah, I suppose you could always go to paulmarcano.com, but dreamscaping.com is my VR linking. That's where I release my applications. Dreamscaping. It's like landscaping, just dreamscaping.com.
Love it.
That's how you can get in touch with me via email and things like that. It's just get in touch. Quite often, if like anybody in the audience, I'd like to offer you, a sort of free copy of my Worst Fears Touch. If you just want to email me from there and just say you were here, I'll be more than happy to give you the. What I do is I sell the Oculus codes. You just pop them into the Oculus settings. I think just redeem code, and you'll get a copy of Worst Fears Touch, and you'll see, that one's kind of like an early version when you look at it, But it'll show you some of the scripting I did in there, and the quality is incredible, because it's actually compacted into a program. There's no need for the kind of compression that you got to have in a multiplayer environment. So the graphics were a little more high end and everything. But yeah, anybody feels like doing that, just go to Dreamscaping and click on my contact there, and I'll be more than happy to send you a code. They gave me 100 codes, so be happy.
There's your Oprah moment under your chairs. You have a code for.
This is your Oprah moment.
Just watch out for the bees.
Yeah, for sure. But you have to have an Oculus, because I didn't compress it for Vive, unfortunately.
Well, I noticed you had a Patreon, and I have a Patreon. Yours is /artist3D, and mine is /Gunter.
Yeah.
So if you want to support us, we like sport. And what I really would like to turn you guys on to is, is the VRChat events Discord. There's not enough Discords. I know you guys want another one. This is where we're going to get all the people that put on events, myself, Lousy Social, the Endgame folks, What's in the Box, whomever wants to be a part of that. Get your own channel in there so you can talk about it. And then people that find out about it through this event will realize, oh my God, there's 10 other events that are going on and I can participate with. And then you can start helping out if you want. If you want to be part of helping one of those events grow and get better and better, this is the place for that. The events channel and the official VRChat's Discord is just not enough. Of course, it's just one thing. So this is a full Discord dedicated to that.
I'm still navigating that Discord. It's getting pretty complicated, actually. There's a lot of channels there already. You want to add more? It's like, wow. I'm wondering how that could be made so that you are aware of these things, right? I mean, it's amazing how much it takes to explore it all.
I mean, Facebook, Twitter, but then you have, there's a lot. There's so much information in so many ways. So we're going to keep promoting this at all the events. All the event folks will be doing that, and just keep driving people. And then I think it'll start taking off. And then, of course, we're mentioning it in the official VRChat server. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for coming out to the show. Artist 3D, one more thing. One final. Did you have one more thing? Oh, it sounded like you were about to say something. So
no, I was just going to say that, what was I going to say? Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. I mean, I actually appreciate any kind of, because, it's my music, I hope people listen to it and enjoy it and find things in there that are interesting, in the worlds themselves. Enjoy, Thanks a lot for coming out.
Thanks, everybody. And I will see you all back here next Tuesday on Gunter's Universe, and I'm stalling a little bit because I gotta hit the pin code to get my music back, which I'm always doing every time. Good night, everybody. Stretch the legs. Stretch the legs. Oof. I'm not too young, man. I feel it now.
I'm young enough already.
We usually talk a lot on the show.
There's one thing I've noticed about this table.